And then one of the cooler things that happened, and I actually saw this when I was on the highway the other day, is then all these people, you remember back in COVID in Canada, like all the truckers that went up to Canada to like do these mile-long thing of like, hey, all the truckers are here to say like, you need to start letting people out again, right? Well, the same thing happened like from all these states that said, no, Texas has the right to defend their stuff. This convoy, they called it the Freedom Convoy, started going down to the Texas border. And we were leaving the Spurs game the other night, Matty and I, my daughter Matty, and we're driving north on 35, and there's like 5 to 10 miles of just semi trucks next to each other going like 5 miles per hour on this highway. It's like, and we're like, what the heck is going on? Aren't we glad we're not going the other way? And it was the convoy. It was the convoy of people that are driving down to the Texas border to kind of do that standoff of support. So there's been a lot of jokes about Texas Civil War, what's going to happen with all this. I don't think it's really going to, I mean, I've joked on my own social medias about the Civil War movie that's coming out in a couple months. Is really just a documentary of what's happening right now. But it's a big deal for a state to say, no, you're not doing your part, for the feds to then say, like, no, we get to come in and do this. And then half the country said, no, Texas is right. And the feds gave a deadline, said, if you don't do it by this, we're coming in by force. And now the deadline has passed. They're not coming in by force. I don't think the Fed's going to do anything anymore. I think Texas now gets to control its border.
Welcome back to the King's Table podcast, everybody. So good to be back. We got the full crew together. I am your host, Ashish Nathu. I am joined by my good friends, Aaron Amuchastegui, the trend spotter himself, logging in. We unfortunately missed him last week. He is missing a critical meeting he never misses just to be here. The sage himself, Mike Ayala, and of course, the hero of hospitality, repping the dad gang hat, Matty Atchison. Good to see you guys. We have a really great full docket today. So many interesting topics. But before we kind of get into the discussions, wanted to share as big news for all of our audience that we are now going live on audio podcasts. We are no longer just doing YouTube. So thanks to Matt and Mike, we out vetoed.
I'm gone
Mooch.
1 week. I'm gone
That's
1
right.
week. You guys take a vote live on the podcast. We got Mike's fireworks going off. I can't leave you guys to your own choices when I'm gone.
We strategically took a vote the week that Aaron was gone. And there you go, guys, serving our audience. We had a lot of people ask us to not only just be on YouTube, but be on, Apple and Spotify and all the fun stuff. So you're going to get us in audio only formats starting this week
as well.
So make sure as well. And
we're
make
still
sure
on YouTube for
comments.
The hardcore fans that want to chat with us.
Yeah. Don't let Aaron down, guys. Keep going to YouTube.
Speaking of YouTube, we've grown our following there. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. I want to shout out a couple of people that have been following and giving us some great comments. Turn Ogle said, love the new intro. If you guys haven't heard, we just launched a new intro to the podcast. Michael Kager's loving the podcast as well. Feels like our AI is going to be negotiating deals, Matty, in the future.
AI against AI.
Yeah, it's going to be AI versus AI. And Cody Cross Real Estate 1. Thanks so much for commenting, Cody. Love what this guy asked us a question. Maybe we can process this at the end. He asked, if you're talking to your 20, 25, 30-year-old selves again, what questions would you be asking? Such a good question. Such an important question to be thinking about our thinking as we get older. Mike, you had a topic that you actually put into the chat about how successful people need to think about our thinking and spend more time thinking. So we're totally resonating with the audience. We really appreciate you guys. But lots of fun topics. So I'm just going to get right into it. The fresh news off the docket, the Fed holds rates, decides not to lower them. That is effective today, this morning. As of last week, the Dow and the S&P hit a all-time record. The Dow is upwards of, 38,500, and the S&P is upwards of 4,900. Highest it's ever been in the history of the stock market. and there's just no recession in sight. What are you guys seeing? What do you think? What are the indicators you're looking at, and what if anything, are you concerned about?
I'll just jump in. I think the interesting part about that is, they're starting to back off just a little bit, based on, they were pretty bullish. I even said when we talked about it a month or two ago, I was surprised that they said we're going to do a bunch of cuts next year, because they said it early. And by saying it early, then the market rallied, then everything pushes up. And if the market continues to rally, they're not going to be able to drop rates, right? If everything's pushing high. And so by them announcing it early, I think it kind of locked them into this. Like, if they don't do it, then they're liars. But by announcing it early, it's going to be tougher to do it. And the stat in that the Bloomberg article, as a result, just says investors see a roughly 40% chance now that the central bank will lower rates for the first time in March, right? So the last rate hike was 8 months ago, right? And now they're saying before, like, if you had looked at this stat even just 2 or 3 weeks ago, they thought there was a 70 to 80% chance they would have had several drops by March. And now there's less than half that the first drop is going to be in March, which means it's more like, at least the people that are surveyed, it's more likely we're not going to see a rate cut first quarter. When we do see our first rate cut, it would be second quarter. And the stock market needs to slow down for them to be able to do it. If the stock market keeps on ripping, I don't think they're going to be able to lower it in second quarter, or they'll just make a small adjustment. I think the stock market's already adjusted to the fact they thought rates were going to go. So that's my quick opinion on it. I just don't think they should have predicted it early like they did.
I agree. The Fed has kind of played their hand a little bit too early, but at the end of the day, it was already writing on the wall. They just couldn't be as transparent and candid about it, right? Jerome Powell is famous for his normal quote of, we'll do whatever we need to do in order to fight inflation, right? Which is kind of his safe response to, when people ask when the Fed's going to cut. So I think, it's I think that it's most likely going to happen after March. But there still is, I think as of today, I'm looking at the Fed funds rate right now, it's a 37.1% chance of a cut. So depending on what happens in, February and what kind of data trickles in, that could accelerate, and increase that percentage of it happening. But I know Lawrence Yun, the National Association of Realtors, yesterday essentially came out and, they gave their economic outlook and predictions for the market as a whole, stating that they think there's going to be some healthy growth. It is funny though, right? When we talk about two different narratives and which one do you buy into? You got two big organizational groups with a lot of data, a lot of access, a lot of resources, and a lot of influence. One being BlackRock, and their statement per Bloomberg was Investment Institute upgraded its U.S. stocks outlook to overweight from neutral, meaning they're going to be aggressive on the U.S. stock market and the potential of it this year. And then you got the New York Fed releasing in a Business Insider article, pricing in a 63% chance that the economy could enter a recession by the end of the year. So kind of two differing narratives, but I think at the end of the day, when you dig into the data, they're going to be cutting, and it's going to create some activity in some areas that have been a little bit stalled out.
One last quick thing on that article. So their statement said, the committee may tweak its guidance on interest rates, dropping a reference to a possible firming of rates in favor of something neutral, like a stance of policy. So meaning like that they weren't going to make any changes at all.
I just I had Tim pull up this article. Tim, will you scroll down a little bit to the top of the article? So this is interesting just thinking about this because, even with the Dow and the S&P 500, it's a good indicator, and it's a great thing to, make money and be watching the market if that's what you're investing in. But the reality too is, a lot of these are made up of such a small percentage of companies too. It takes the average of the companies that are in there and kind of, gives us the Dow Jones Industrial Average or whatever it is. But if you look at this article from Zero Hedge, it talks about how, and this was Friday, January 26th, earlier today, we reported that according to Biden's Bureau of Economic Analysis, in the fourth quarter, U.S. GDP grew at a torrid 3.3% pace, which beat everything that they were projecting. But what's interesting, if you look at this chart, and I won't spend a lot of time on this today, maybe we'll dig into it deeper. But if you look at this chart in this article from Zero Hedge, if you look at the Q4 GDP increase versus the Q4 budget deficit increase, and then the Q4 debt increase, this is really interesting. And we talk about this a lot on the show, getting conflicting information and market indicators. But what's really interesting, the chart below that actually shows that for the first time, the federal interest payments have surpassed $1 trillion for the first time ever. So when you look at this, this article actually points this out. But what's really interesting is it basically takes $2.50 of new debt to generate $1 of GDP, which is just freaking mind blowing. So when we focus on these, reports that come out with, high earnings and the Dow and the S&P 500 and companies are doing great. Yeah, that's great. But, the bigger issue, and again, I'm always the guy that says, I don't know if it really matters because we're just going to print into an oblivion until it stops at some point in time. And again, just kind of, talking about the duality around this, we're not controlling the debt. We're not controlling the Fed. We're not controlling the interest rates. So, my take on this is, as long as we're in a fiat system, we have to take advantage and again, really learn, what can we as average everyday human beings do about this? They're not printing, or they're not going to stop printing anytime soon. So the reality is, as Kiyosaki has said for years, savers are losers. We have to figure out where to invest. But this is just mind blowing. It takes $2.50 of new debt to generate $1 of GDP growth, which is just mind blowing at the end of the day.
I think it's fascinating, Mike. So from that perspective, you're saying that a lot of the economic growth of the stock market, let's call it, is because of the amount of money that's in the system. Most of it is debt, not necessarily representative of optimism. I guess my question is for all of you guys is, okay, well, that being said, if the Fed has already signaled that rates will start to adjust this year, which is only one lever that we're talking about now, where do we see sort of the end of this year in terms of what segments will grow, what segments won't? So are you saying that, okay, the debt's got to keep increasing in order for the GDP to grow? As of I think the fourth quarter, the economy grew 3.1%, which was a huge blowout. It represents a lot of the January growth in the stock market. People were just super surprised that the economy grew as strong as it did. And so this soft landing or bumping landing may be way smoother than we expected. So where does this take us a year out in what commodities or what categories? We've talked about on the podcast that real estate is expected to go higher if interest rates goes down. What are some of the things you guys are thinking about in terms of asset classes that people can consider? Let's go around the docket. Let's start with Matty. What do you think, Matty? Where are we going to end up this year, by the end of the year?
With commercial real estate specifically, or what do you mean?
Everything. Do you feel like, okay, if interest rates start to adjust, there's a resilient labor market, unemployment's literally bottom, right? It's almost zero. Consumer spending is still pretty strong. Do we just continue and maintain this level of growth by the end of the year? Have they been successful? Has the Fed been successful? Where do you see this kind of in multiple asset classes by the end of the year?
I mean, I think this will be the year that we could probably put a label on successful, or, if there's alternative labels on what the Fed has done. But I think for the most part, in spite of everything that's gone on the last 3 to 4 years, they've done a pretty damn good job, navigating this turbulence. I can tell you what I'm doing. I mean, right now, I'm going to throw a pretty good chunk of money at the market because the second they cut interest rates, there's going to be some upside to be had. And I've been dollar cost averaging my way through, but I'm actually throwing a good lump sum into the market as well with my financial advisor and a handful of other people just that I know are looking at it through the same lens. So I think there is definitely some good potential upside in the stock market. But honestly, right now, I'm keeping a lot of dry powder still available because I do believe that there is going to still be some variables that we do know are going to create some turbulence. And I also think this year there's going to be some curveballs around the corners that we can't necessarily see that are still unforeseen that could create some turbulence as well. So I am in a very opportunistic and aggressive mindset right now. At the same time, I think there's going to be very specific asset classes that have a lot more of a challenge this year in commercial real estate. I think single family is going to still hold very strong. Lawrence Yun and the chief economic advisor for National Association of Realtors, and their economic outlook is that there's going to be some stable growth. I thought it was funny that Robert Kiyosaki said that he thinks the real estate crash is coming this year, which he's been a perma bear and called many crashes that have never happened. That being said, he noted that he thinks the asset class of STRs is going to be kind of one of the lead dominoes that hits single family real estate. I don't think with the level of demand that is going to be in single family and the level of supply that it will be a domino big enough to have that large of a ripple effect from a macro perspective. But I think in certain economies, there's definitely going to be some opportunities where they're cracking down with legislation, with policy, and people bought these assets based on short-term, cash flows versus the, worst case scenario of a long-term tenant having to stay in there. So I think there'll be opportunities there, but I don't see anything catastrophic there.
Mike, you agree with Matty?
Yeah.
Stock market and stay with some bright dry powder and see what happens.
I agree with everything Matty said, including, housing. But I think circling back to what Aaron said before I pulled up the Zero Hedge article and even confirming, I think the Fed has done a good job. And this is something that I've talked about a lot in the past. We're in a different era. And the Zero Hedge article really points that out. That's what I was kind of driving at. I don't know that the Fed actually knows what they need to do 3 months from now, 6 months from now. And so for us, I don't mean us as the King's Table, but for us as, investors, business owners, just everyday humans, I think we have to watch this really closely because when you look at the amount of debt, again, it takes $2.50 of debt to get $1 of GDP growth. We're in this era that we've never been before. And I think that that's what the Fed is really challenged with, is threading the needle, because what Aaron so rightly pointed out is, they're having to control inflation. And it's like this double-edged sword, because if interest rates come too low, people are going to come out in a fury, development's going to happen, housing prices are going to go back up. So they're having to battle, multiple sides of this argument. But the thing that's very apparent to me is the influx of capital or debt into the system. $250 for every dollar of GDP is not slowing down. It can't slow down. And that just naturally by nature creates inflation. That is the definition of inflation. There's more dollars chasing goods and services. So I think there's not just interest rates, but also the fact that we are in such a debt consumed world that as debt keeps getting printed, there's pressure on inflation to go up. And therefore, if they drop interest rates too low, it's going to create further inflation. So I don't know that prediction. I don't know that I can even predict what's going to happen by year end, because I don't think the Fed knows what they're going to do 3 months from now, to be honest. I think they're watching something that's a very, very challenging thing, and it's new. This isn't something that we can look back to, what happened in 1980. So many people want to say, well, in 80s, the inflation went through the roof. Well, that's true, but it was a completely different time. So I agree with Matty. I agree with Aaron. I think watching what the Fed is going to do is important, but also I don't think they really know. I think they have to watch on a live basis, and they might change their mind 2 weeks from now.
Well, let's pivot to the border. It is a topic that we talked about last week. Matty and Mike processed it a little bit. Lots of new information coming on this week. Texas is suing the federal government, saying that they are going to take over this responsibility of protecting its border. They're calling it an invasion. Mooch, you shared an article. Why don't you kind of tell us, why is this important? What's really going on here? What do you think is really going on here? You guys live in Texas. What are the conversations happening on the street in your circles? And what is really going to end up here? Is the state going to win? Is the Fed going to win? But just a really fascinating situation right now.
Yeah. There's been so many, articles and videos and TikToks this week of the people talking about it, and there was, one of the Texas senators went out and he said, hey, New York City said that the biggest problem that they're facing is illegal immigration. And there's like 100,000 illegal immigrants in New York City, and the guy says, hey, if that's breaking New York City, then what's 6 million people supposed to do to Texas? What Greg Abbott had posted there. So they, this week they transported 100,000 migrants to sanctuary cities. So essentially the ones that the illegal immigrants that got across the border, they've been trying to help them go to other places. What happened over the last week or two, and you guys talked about it a little bit last week, and I thought Matty was great in the sense that he said, hey, I'm not against immigration, right? We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for immigration. It's illegal immigration that creates issues. And I've got people that work for me that were illegal immigrants, for a long time too. So as we split back and forth on it, we're not judging people, but we're judging economics and the system. And why is our country different than everywhere else? Because Canada is very different when it comes to letting people in. Everywhere is very different when it comes to letting people in. The news that happened over the last couple of weeks, though, was Texas said, hey, we're going to start securing our border better. We're going to secure our border with National Guard because the feds keep letting everybody in, and it's a crisis, and we're having to bust people out. And why don't we just do a better job at the border, right? Back to policy from years ago of like, let's build a wall. Let's keep it that way. And then the federal government sends people in to start cutting down the essentially this extra barbed wire and stuff. They're trying to secure the border more. He said, no, that's not humanitarian. The Supreme Court says feds are right. Texas can't do this. So then they send the federal border patrol in to start cutting down the barbed wire again. And then Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, says, not going to do it. We're going to bring out the National Guard. Texas has its own army. Essentially, the Texas National Guard is not a small army by any means. I read a stat that it would be like the 25th largest army in the world or something. The Texas National Guard would be pretty interesting stuff. If that number is anywhere close to real. So then they've had this battle back and forth where essentially now Texas National Guard is not letting the Border Patrol in anymore. And so they've essentially kicked them out of that. Hey, they can't. So that's the battle back and forth. Then Biden said, hey, you've got until tomorrow, which was like the 26th, to let us back in or we're going to show force. Well, and Abbott said, nope, not going to happen. We're not letting you back in. And then 26 other states started saying, Texas is right. Texas has the right to secure the border. Abbott brought up all these things with the Constitution that said, hey, that's right here. If the federal government doesn't protect our interests anymore, we're allowed to protect our own interests. More than half the states agreed. And then one of the cooler things that happened, and I actually saw this when I was on the highway the other day, is then all these people, you remember back in COVID in Canada, like all the truckers that went up to Canada to like do these mile-long thing of like, hey, all the truckers are here to say like, you need to start letting people out again, right? Well, the same thing happened like from all these states that said, no, Texas has the right to defend their stuff. This convoy, they called it the Freedom Convoy, started going down to the Texas border. And we were leaving the Spurs game the other night, Matty and I, my daughter Matty, and we're driving north on 35. And there's like 5 to 10 miles of just semi trucks next to each other going like 5 miles per hour on this highway. It's like, and we're like, what the heck is going on? Aren't we glad we're not going the other way? And it was the convoy. It was the convoy of people that are driving down to the Texas border to kind of do that standoff of support. So there's been a lot of jokes about Texas Civil War, what's going to happen with all this. I don't think it's really going to, I mean, I've joked on my own social medias about the Civil War movie that's coming out in a couple months. It's really just a documentary of what's happening right now. But it's a big deal for a state to say, no, you're not doing your part. For the feds to then say, like, no, we get to come in and do this. And then half the country said, no, Texas is right. And the feds gave a deadline, said, if you don't do it by this, we're coming in by force. And now the deadline has passed. They're not coming in by force. I don't think the Fed's going to do anything anymore. I think Texas now gets to control its border. And I think it's pretty cool to see. If the other states hadn't jumped on, I don't think it would necessarily be the same story. I mean, Texas would still be willing to fight the battle, but the feds might be willing to fight it harder if they didn't realize that more than half the country supported Texas in it.
It's wild how many news and media outlets, I mean, they're not covering 1 minute of this, which is
completely backwards,
which is wild, right?
Huge news down here.
I mean, it's to me, that's telling there's so many ironies in what's going on here. First and foremost, like the same government that sued Texas to halt protecting the border by removing the fences and cutting down the razor wire is the same government that erected a 7-foot fence with razor wire around the Capitol when all of the Palestinian protests and everything were going on, right? So like it's a perfect example of their hypocrisy. And I saw a funny little meme the other day that was, if the United States saw what the United States is doing in the United States would invade the United States to liberate the United States from the tyranny of the United States. And I thought it was funny, right? Like we're all of the same stuff we're using as excuses to go and fight wars in other countries, we're literally doing here in America. And it's just being, packaged up in a bow very differently. So it's interesting from that perspective, but I think there's many reasons why people want closed borders that are not anti-immigration. They're just anti-illegal immigration, right? But this narrative that is being created around it is very interesting to me. But then as you start digging in and going, well, why would they be fighting? Like, not only are they saying,
why is this issue, why is this controversial, right, Matty? This should not be controversial.
Yeah, well, and just in the sense of, it's one thing to say, hey, we feel we're doing what is necessary to keep our borders safe. But now it's going, no, we're actually fighting against measures that are enhanced and even more protective of keeping our country safe, because we're seeing cities get overrun and schools and hospitals and social programs and all of these things getting overrun because of a massive influx. And you keep hearing them say, well, this is for, people fleeing tyranny and women and children. And when you see a ton of the videos of who is actually coming across the border, majority of them are military aged men. And there was a video that just came out of a massive group of Chinese migrants that came over through, and they were all standing, hands behind their backs in military formation. You saw that video, and I don't know if Tim wants to pull that up, but there was another video of a guy that said, oh, you're not smart enough to know who I am. You'll know who I am soon enough. And the guy, disappeared into wherever land. And what they found out was this guy was sentenced to 10 years in Guantanamo Bay. You can even just play this clip real quick, because I want to, show this is the type of stuff that people are concerned about, right? It's not about, oh, this is coming across our border and we have a problem with that. It's no, this is a national security issue. This is an infrastructure issue. This is a health and wellness issue. When you see articles of women getting raped or murdered or businesses getting broken and stolen into, and oh yeah, this is somebody that came across the border, they're illegal, and now you're seeing non-citizens have more rights than our actual citizens, that's a problem. But you can go ahead and play this video, because I think this shows the magnitude of some of the concerns on the most extreme levels.
Smart enough, you would know who I am. But you are really not smart enough to know who I am. But soon you're going to know who I am.
So he was the chairman of the Islamic Party. Oh, and by the way, he was sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment for terrorism, right? So like how many of these types of individuals are coming across the border that this is somebody we know about? How many do we not know about, right? And there's another video that I would love to queue up. There's this guy, his name is Matty.
He just wants to move. He really just wants to move to Austin for the barbecue. That's really why he's the other one. That's why he's crossing the border.
Stay in Austin.
Just to be clear, he just wants to come to America for the barbecue.
Sure, and I can't knock him for that, man. We got good barbecue. You know what I'm saying? I like food too. My nickname's Fatty Matty for a reason. But that being said, there is a guy named Matty that got invited to just through some of his podcasts and some of the kind of grassroots news stuff that he's been doing. He's a little James O'Keefe-ish Asian dude. And Tim, if you can pull up that video, I think it's the third or fourth link in the one that I sent over on that particular topic. But he actually goes to a level of breaking down at the root of strategy behind why this administration wants open borders. And if you can pull that video up, I think he does a great job of talking about, you know, what some of the real reasons at the root of this could turn into, and how that could lead to a much bigger issue than just open borders right now. So
yeah, it's a pretty simple explanation of why. When you would say why would the other side want open borders? But I think the overall summary when this video comes up, if Tim can't find it, the overall summary of this video
argument? What's the logical, non-political argument for why
the political argument is that illegal aliens are going to vote Democrat?
Yeah, we talked about that and we agree. But what is the non-political citizenry argument for, this is a good idea?
The only other good idea was that it would bring down the cost of goods. Because the more people that are willing and able to work and usually willing and able to work for less money than, you know, college educated people in California is a big thing. You know, I
don't know if I buy that. I don't know
when it talks about like the farms in California, I remember living there and it was a big deal. And they were like, who else is going to be working like the really, really hard jobs? Like most of the time, like
bullshit. There's like to say that.
Yeah, that's not what's happening.
Well, it's just crazy. That's
I don't think that Aaron is. I don't think
it's Mikey's turn. Mike can jump in.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think Aaron's arguing for that. Ash, you're asking for like the logical, which I think is I think Ash, there is no logical argument. The logical answer is create a system that allows legal immigration and it doesn't take 8 or 9 or 10 or 15 years to get through it. Right. My family, I remember going to my dad's when he became a citizen, you know, and I mean, he worked his ass off, my stepdad, to become a citizen. And there was a guy that worked for me back in the day. I won't mention his name. And I didn't know, just as a disclaimer, I didn't know he was illegal. But he worked his ass off for like 10 years to try to get his citizenship. And so there's no logical explanation to this other than what I don't think Aaron was arguing for that. And I do think that
I know.
Like that whole argument around, you know, Americans don't, when was the last time that you saw an American, you know, doing somebody's lawn or picking berries in California? It doesn't happen. So it is a logical argument. But the answer to it is not open the borders. It's figure out how to legalize this system. And there's no logic to it whatsoever, because what Aaron was saying is the truth. Like they want voters, they want people to come in. There's no logical answer to this.
Well, here's this guy does a great job of doing research and really digging in on some pretty controversial topics. And this one, go ahead, you can play this and we can talk about it in a second.
Establishment-run invasion at the southern border is to permanently change the U.S. electorate forever. And the solution is obvious. But first, a video for context.
Numbers you need to understand. Yale University released a study last week by 3 researchers, all of them liberal, I believe, who concluded that the actual number of illegal aliens in this country is not 11 million. It's north of 22 million. 22 million. Fact 1. Fact 2. The Democratic Party is now, as a matter of policy, calling for the legalization of all illegals in this country. Citizenship, voting rights. 22 million new voters. Fact 3. The overwhelming majority of first-time immigrant voters vote Democrat. Fact 4. The largest margin in American presidential history was 17 million votes. 1984 election between Mondale and Reagan.
And Reagan, yeah.
17 million. You would add to our voter rolls 22 million, at least, permanent electoral majority in perpetuity. That's what this is about. It's not about making the country better, serving our labor needs, helping the population. It's about putting Democrats in power forever. That is the truth of our immigration debate, period.
The goal is to permanently change the electorate and keep one party in power forever. Here's a couple of solutions and observations. 1, there is no physical way to remove 22 million new people. I'm sorry, but it's impossible.
How are you going to remove that many people?
Billions of tax dollars would need to significantly increase the size of the federal government to even attempt, and would require the mobilization of military domestically to round up said people and forcefully remove. I don't care what anyone says. It's just physically not possible to be done without huge social and political fallout. The damage caused from such an effort is most likely larger than the problem it aims to solve. But then what can we do? Solutions. Need to win over the incoming populace, educate and inform. The premise for the importing Democratic Party is that all the illegal immigrants will vote blue. What if we convince them to vote red? Close that gap. If the potential votes of illegal immigrants were red instead of blue, it would not only solve the electoral manipulation problem, but the establishment would be forced to shut down the border immediately to prevent additional red votes. Even if the border was shut down today, we have an issue of 22 million new people we need to deal with. Yes, close the border. We're full. Great. But we also need to start thinking of actual real solutions for the people that are already here. If it's about putting Democrats in power forever, the most obvious solution, split the migrant vote. If the purpose of the establishment-run invasion at the southern...
That's it.
Yeah, I think there's something also, I mean, that was a really nice framework that he shared. One of the things I think is really interesting that's happening too is this problem is becoming, it's coming to the footsteps of Americans in a way that maybe it hasn't in the past. And it's why we're seeing all the virality of it. I had somebody like a couple of months ago when I talked about this issue tell me like, Ashish, why do you care about this problem? Like, why is the border such an important thing? And ironically, we were sitting in his $4 million house in a gated community. And like, now I was thinking about like, why was he showing up in a way that's like, Ashish, like, well, this is not a problem that you should care about. You know, you have a business, manufacturing business. This is good for you. You can hire cheap labor. And my answer today would be like, well, what if your gated community just let anyone in and shut the gate down? You know, would the value of your home be devalued? Would the safety of your kids playing in the neighborhood be something concerning to you? If people just were walking around, I mean, I should say, hey, wouldn't it be easier to get support or help in your home if the borders were open? But no. So I think it's funny that the people that vote for these types of things or potentially support these things are protected in their 60-story high rises or in their gated communities, but it's actually coming to their doorstep, right? In all these major cities. So just a fascinating dynamic. And I just, I can't understand the logic of this. And we really got to make this happen quickly and efficiently because it doesn't look like it's getting any better. And it looks like this problem is completely being politicized, right? Aaron, why don't you bring us home and let's go to the next topic.
I don't think I have anything to add on the end of that before we jump over to the next one. The idea of it in perpetuity was the big deal. The idea of it could become something where then it stays like that forever. That guy is saying, hey, the solution is get illegal immigrants to go to like switch over. Impossible. Little story though about legal immigration, right? Gal that works for me. Comes to the U.S. when she's 1, grows up in the U.S., elementary school, high school, been working for me for years, right? Just now, at 27 years old, she now has a green card and a passport where she can leave the country and go back to Mexico where she was born to go visit family. So it took her 27 years of working and paying taxes and living in a legalized system before she could become a legal person here. And the 27 years. Right. And now they're talking about just making that legal and easy when it's happening. So it's a very big change. Anyway, the solution is legal immigration becoming quicker, like a quicker, realistic process, maybe similar to being what it takes to get TSA pre when you're going to fly somewhere.
Yeah. My final thought real quick on it, Ash, is, and the fact that you brought up the TSA pre thing is crazy, right? Because I thought that was wild. You know how what we as citizens have to go through in order to pass through TSA. And yet in the pre-TSA line, migrants don't have to have an ID to get through security. And it's their choice whether they want to have a picture taken or not. So we have no idea who we're flying with, yet us as citizens have to go through all of these things, right? That's just one example. So I'm not here to say everything is wrong and they're trying to destroy America. But I am here to say that having healthy levels of paranoia get you to asking better questions and doing more research and not taking things at face value. And over the course of the last few years, I've had this weird sense of paranoia, not in a place that is paralyzing or that makes me so negative and a victim and angry, but more so empowered to be more aware and to ask better questions and have more intentional conversations that allow us to like have these debates and discussions, not to be right, but just to have more dialogue around really important topics that are impacting not just us on this call, not just the people that are listening, but our entire country, which I think a lot of people are waking up to.
Let's take a 90-degree angle to something a little lighter. Besides the border, probably the second most Googled word right now is Musk in the universe. Elon Musk is up to some fun things this week, and he's definitely had some headlines. The first thing that happened this week with Elon was that the first Neuralink was implanted in a human brain, which I thought was super fascinating. Neuralink is by now, I think it's valued at about $3.5 billion. The company was started by Elon Musk in 2016. It's a highly invasive procedure that places a small little chip in the prefrontal cortex of the human brain. I think they've done a lot of testing on this, but they're working on using this for neurological diseases and different types of issues, and just super fascinating. The fact that we can actually implant chips in human brains, such a cool technological advance. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts or comments on it. Just thought it'd be something that is hopefully a sign that there's so much progress in the future. It's sort of our Matrix moment where we can just download things straight to our brain. I always felt like that's part of our future. And as of today, you know, this whoever this volunteer was is successfully has a chip planted into their brain. So just super cool, just from a fun news situation. And then I think the big news that's on his docket is that his stock got revoked. Over $50 billion of his stock got revoked by a judge, not by shareholders, not by employees, not by the board, but by a judge. So, Aaron, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about what this article is about and what's really going on here. But what I'd like to go around and talk about is, how does this happen that a judge can decide whether it's for Elon or any other company, in terms of how does this get to a place where entrepreneurs, business owners can take more control about their entity structures? I think this is in Delaware, if I'm not mistaken. So does it matter what state? I think there was a conversation on Twitter about this, or X, about what state should I incorporate in so this doesn't happen to me. So let's also talk about why it's relevant to the average day business owner who doesn't have $50 billion to lose. Mooch, go ahead.
I'll pull it back up in just a second, the article, but to start with that Neuralink thing, Musk is brilliant. He's brilliant. He's excited. I cannot wait to tap our Neuralink into my brain. You guys know that I was the first to get like Google Glass, all the things. Like I'm like,
too.
I love having my car drive itself. People are like, that freaks me out. Like, no, I push it to its limits, and I love that stuff. The other part that was brilliant, that was probably just an only Musk thing that could do, right? The first thought of like, well, who are they going to start this with? How are they going to actually start human trials? Who wants to volunteer for that? But it's fascinating. The people that are volunteering first are people that essentially can't move, you know, quadriplegics, and all of a sudden that was like, oh yeah, like people that are trapped inside their body that are alive and have no ability to move. Like they barely have the ability to actually opt in to say like, okay, I'll be the volunteer realistically. But some of the things he talked about was like, what if Stephen Hawking could actually share thoughts at the speed he feels them? Right? Like, how would that change the world? So brilliant in the way they decided to launch, because there's guys like us that are like, hey, I want to be able to do that, to download how to do karate in a second and be Keanu Reeves in Matrix. Yes. But them starting that way and saying like, no, first it's going to actually help people like maybe start getting limbs to move again, because there's a spot in the brain where the brain can't talk to the legs anymore because of something, but maybe they can do it. Fascinating, brilliant guy. If anybody can do it, it's Musk. But I think it also relates to this other article, right? And so, you know, it says Musk's $55 billion pay package voided, threatening the world's biggest fortune. And so I think it started with a shareholder lawsuit. So a shareholder challenged that it was an excessive pay, the $55 billion pay package. So it started with a shareholder filing a lawsuit. Delaware judge then says yes, which would take a $55 billion out of his net worth. He would now be the third richest person alive because his assets would drop to 154 billion. You know, the sad thing about that is they say no one's going to feel bad for him. I feel bad for him. I think he's brilliant, and I think that he's going to change the world with however many billions he has, and I would trust him more than I would trust a lot of the politicians that get to keep track of our money. But he had been, he had been number one world's richest. Now to move him down to third. It sided with an investor who complained Tesla directors didn't make proper disclosures about his package and found that conflicts of interest marred the board's consideration of the pay plan. In the final analysis, Musk launched a self-driving process. So it goes through all these things. But I think the interesting part about the article is, one, they said now they have to go back and renegotiate his pay. He also has less stock right now because he sold so much stock to buy Twitter. But this is really why, like 3 weeks ago, Musk said, hey, you know what? If I'm going to keep growing Tesla, I need more shares. Otherwise, I'm going to take my robot idea, and instead of doing it at Tesla, I'm going to go start a robot company, right? Or, hey, I'm changing self-driving. Why would I do this here? Why would I take all these ideas in Tesla? Like, he's the guy building Neuralink. He's the guy, with SpaceX. He's the guy with the others. So he's kind of threatening them and saying, hey, like, I've got the Tesla robot that is going to change the world. But if you guys don't increase my comp, I'm leaving and I'm going to go launch Musk robot instead. And because I'm using all this brain power for that. But this was the cause of it. When people are like, why is he doing that? Why is he actually pushing for more? It's because he knew that this was going to happen and he was going to be losing so much stock. So I think it puts a little bit of perspective of, the conversations from a few weeks ago. I was surprised to read this, and then it made a lot more sense of, like, he wasn't really being greedy, right? In the same sense, I don't believe that the robot should be part of Tesla, driving. I think that companies should stay separate. I don't think you should use, now I do the same thing. I've got a whole bunch of companies and they help each other and they prop up, but they're pretty well related. But flying to space and Neuralink and robots is different than a self-driving car. For very different business stuff. So I hope they fix it. I mean, I know that most of the world would vote with this judge and say no human should be able to get a $55 billion bonus. Most people are going to say that. Why would he need it? I disagree. I think he's a world changer. And I trust him more with the money than anybody else. But I think the suit's going to hold up when it goes to that. So I think they're going to have to change his pay package. But he'll be able to do it. It looks like from the lawsuit too. They can pay him whatever they want, as long as they disclose it and they give enough notice for shareholders to react. As a result of this announcement, shares went down a little bit. But yeah, he sold stock to buy TikTok or to buy Twitter. So he didn't have as much stock anymore. He knew this was coming. And now he's saying, hey, I'm about to change the world and triple and quadruple up the stock again. So yeah.
But Mooch, to be clear, this is in the form of stock, not cash. Because I think people see his net worth and be like, oh, this is a $50 million check. It's not that. It's
actually a stock
options or stock. Right. It's not even stock. It's an option to execute the option. So
yeah,
just to be clear to people that where his wealth is and what it really represents.
Really good point. Yeah, I said Musk never attempted to exercise his option since they'd been challenged in Delaware Chancery Court. That's like us, like when we put values on companies we own, going, hey, if I sell this company, I could probably sell it for like 15 or 20 million, even though I don't have an offer for that. They're saying like, hey, if he went and exercised those stocks, he could buy them for $50 a share today and he could sell them for $100 right after. So it added to his net worth because he had the ability to do it. But part of why he never exercised it was he thought this was coming. So yeah, but you're totally right. It's not cash in the bank, but it is it is net worth.
And Ash, back to your, I'll make this quick, but back to your initial question, like, how does this affect everyday business owners? It doesn't, because the difference is the moment that we decide to go public, we're in a different realm, and you're held to different standards. And like Aaron was saying about reporting, the shareholders, the board, once you go public, you're in a whole different realm. So this actually doesn't affect, everyday business owners like us. It's not like a judge can come in and say, Mike, you shouldn't pay yourself that much money,
right?
Unless we're under doing something wrong or whatever. But this really doesn't affect everyday Americans. And this is the thing that people don't understand. I love the point that you just brought up and Aaron pointed out. Like, people don't understand the point that you brought up, like this isn't cash. They're not taking cash away from Elon Musk. It's stock, it's options. And again, my point was the minute you decide to take your company public, you're in a whole different realm of responsibilities, reporting issues, and control from your board at the end of the day. So I'm not saying he's wrong in any of it. I'm a fan. I believe in him. I agree with everything Aaron said, but this really doesn't affect everyday business owners having a judge come in and say you can't make $700,000 a year.
Well, let's talk about something that does affect business owners. We've talked about it on the podcast before. We have our own perspective on this, and we've been able to navigate this successfully. So I do want to talk about this. I've had more conversations about this in the last 2 or 3 weeks than I'm proud to talk about or admit. But DEI, the woke nature of employees taking over organizations, is becoming a huge problem. And I want to go around and talk about this. There's a lot of different aspects to this that we have in the chat right now, so we can go wherever we need to go. But I want to preface this by saying that when a company is controlled by its employees, it's really hard to control the direction of the business. Number one. Number two, I think why DEI is so interesting. If you don't know what DEI is, by the way, it's diversity, exclusion, and inclusion. What is it?
Diversity,
equity,
and inclusion.
Yeah, I found the article too.
The diversity, equity, and inclusion. The second reason why this is very important for business owners to be in tune with is that I think that there's like this huge hypocrisy that the DEI community is forcing companies to be more inclusive, have diversity. If I can't hire or fire based on these diversity metrics, then why am I forced to have them in the first place? Like, for example, if I can't hire or fire Mike because he's Mexican, then or a minority,
or Indian,
well, by definition, 95% of all my employees are Indian, Mike.
Mike, what are you?
I'm Indian.
But why do I have to? Why am I measured on the diversity of my employment base or the amount of women that are in my board or whatever? Now, we're not saying the diversity is not important. We're just saying that if we're being judged to hire and fire on merit and not on race, gender, sexual class, orientation, blah blah blah, then why is that important to have that be the makeup of our organizations, our boards, etc.? It is a double standard. It makes no sense. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So you can't have both of them at the same exact time. So I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about this. You have some really large global companies. Basically, the employees have a chokehold on these organizations, Disney being the most specific. But so many organizations are struggling with this issue from the inside out. And we have been successful, I would say, thus far, knock on wood, to be able to navigate this in a healthy, productive way. I'd love to share my thoughts once we go around the table. But this is an important topic that I think leaders have to own and can't just let this happen and let this be, because it will take control from the inside out. So let's go to Mikey first, and then we'll go around.
I can make mine short. You said everything that I really believe about this. At the end of the day, like it's merit based, and at the end of the day, like the government requires us to not profile. We can't discriminate based on age, religion, race, sex. Yet we're saying we have to hire based on these things. And it's just, anyway, you already said it, but that's my thing at the end of the day. Like, which is it? And we shouldn't discriminate. We should 100% hire based on merit and who's qualified for the job. I don't want to be in a plane with somebody just because they're a female or
right.
Black.
That was the next one. I think it's airplanes. Right? They're hiring pilots based on this.
Yeah. So I just, you said it. That's enough for me. But
how are you communicating this, Mike, in your organization, if at all?
I'm not. I'm not
Why?
going to, when I owned my plumbing and heating company, you know how many times an employee would come to me and say, hey, I met the union rep. They want to unionize. And I would just flat out say, if you guys start to unionize, I will shut this business down and I will start over. I'm not even having this conversation because the reality is, from a legal perspective, I'm not worried about getting, canceled as a business owner. I don't need to talk about it. And the reality is, when we go out to hire somebody, this is what's wrong with this whole ideology. When we go out to hire somebody, I don't care if you're black. I don't care if you're white. I don't care if you're old. I don't care if you're young. I don't care if you're a girl. I don't care if you're a woman that has a penis. Like, I actually don't care. And we're not even allowed to ask this stuff. Yet
which is, yes, you can't even talk about it. You can't even ask. So how are you supposed to add them if you don't know? It's just funny.
Yeah, so I'm not even talking about it. I'm not buying into it. I'm not playing the game. Hire people based on merit. Here's the job description. I don't care if you're green. It doesn't matter to me. So we're not even talking about it. Except here.
Mooch.
So the advice for a normal business owner, right? It's one of the reasons you don't go public, because then, you're not gonna have the choice anymore. But here's the advice as business owners. What it forces everyone to do is it enforces every boss. I remember being a business owner in California, I got this instilled in me. You have to just keep track of stuff in your business. When people do great, you have to write it down. When people do bad, you have to write it down. When people get warnings, you have to write it down. If people skip work, if people come late, you need to have this chart. And I have a giant chart that shows who did their start of day emails, who did their end of day emails, what time they got to the office, what days they did sick, what time they left, right? Because what happens is you have to make sure to cover your ass when you do terminate somebody, that you have a clear method and list of, I terminated them because of this. Because there used to be all sorts of other reasons that people would sue, and now it could be for something that you don't even know. So in one sense, how does a normal business person own it? I think you do what Mike says, is you don't ask anything like that, but you also just keep track of people, because mind you, when you do, also it's the same with housing, right? So we're super careful when we're doing applications on rents, right? Because someone could and we have to we can't make an exception for anybody, right? If somebody makes $1 less than income, we can't make an exception, because if you make an exception for when you put somebody in a house or when you evict them, and then you find out later they're in a class that maybe is a protected class now or will be a protected class in the future. I wonder though, in 50 years, desegregation was not that long ago, actually, right? Desegregation in the US is not that long ago. And when I talk to younger people, my kids' ages, right? It seems like it's a really easy solution for them. It's a really easy thing. It all makes a lot of sense. And it's the same battle of black and white from many years ago. So I wonder in 30 or 40 years, if we're going to look back and go, why was this so hard for everybody to come down to, or if we're still going to be there. Who knows when that line goes.
Mooch,
I mean,
what do you mean? What is easier? What do you mean?
So meaning in 10 or 15 years, are we going to look back and go, oh, it actually makes a lot of sense now. I get why that should have been a protected class. We have a lot more. I get why it should have been a thing. I get why we should have cared. I get why we should have given some extra attention to that. Or because I know that 50 or 60 years ago, before desegregation, right? It wasn't that simple. And now it is that simple. You ask us today, are Indians, blacks, Mexicans, Hawaii, is everybody the same? Absolutely 100%. Do I look at that at all with hiring? I don't look at it at all with hiring, right? But it's easy for me to say because of when I was born. Tim, can you pull up that article really quick? And I think this is a little bit side off of requiring people to hire and fire, but it's the beach one that I just sent. This came on our chat a week ago.
Yeah.
And we are pushing the borders on some extra topics right now because I think it's important. And it says Rip Curl removes post celebrating trans surfer after boycott and pushback from U.S. athletes, right? This sort of stuff has been happening in the news so much with Disney and their characters, or whether it was at Bud Light or, these different businesses that are doing a big push of celebrating that. Whether it's right or wrong or who you are, my biggest opinion is that businesses should stay out of the workplace. What did they expect, right or wrong, if you're running a business, you have to know that by pushing a campaign like this, you're going to get pushback by like every other company that ran a campaign like this, and it's going to hurt your bottom line. Like businesses are being irresponsible financially to their shareholders or their owners when they push these sorts of images out. Whether it's morally right or wrong, that's a different thing. That my kids will tell me I'm wrong, and in 50 years, who knows what I'm going to say on it. From a business stance, I know that any company that does a very deliberate, loud, transgender type push, they are going to lose customers because of it. They're not going to gain customers because of it. So what I put in the chat when this came up is, why would they do it? Why would any business owner do something that they know is going to cost them money and cost them business? It's better to stay unopinionated.
I mean, Mooch, rhetorical question. Where do you think this is coming from? Do you think this is coming from its customers? Do you think it's coming from his employees? Or do you think it's coming from the boardroom?
Coming from their
I think that
hiring.
Well, so maybe in Disney, and that's maybe how it's related. I think part of what happened in Disney is there were some people that were very high up that had very personal experiences with this that made it really important. Now, if my kid said, "Hey, Dad, I really need you to do this for me," would I push a boundary that might cost my business? Maybe, right? Like, I hope not, but maybe. Like, so it could be from that, but I don't think it's really happening in the boardroom. I think what happens is there's somebody in control at different things that pushes the stuff out that goes like, because I don't double check every marketing campaign that gets pushed out in my company. Man, and I can't imagine being as big as a Rip Curl or a Disney or something else. So I think it comes from a few small people, and maybe people have to extra protection inside their company. So you can stop sharing that, I think. But that was pretty passionate about it. It's just something that like I think that businesses should be staying out of it. But like Matty could be right because of like the way people are hiring. Maybe that's how. I think it's either people at the top with a very strong emotional connection. This like same people that fought for segregation in the past and would have lost business because of it. That was a thing, right? Like the first people that were brave, it was a thing. And so I'm trying to hedge this a little bit to go, we might be wrong in 20 years when we look back, but I think it's bad for business to be involved in it.
We're only wrong if we allow it. And I'll make this quick, but I have a friend who got sued by a green person. And this friend has no issues with green persons whatsoever, like never has, and then got sued by a second green person. And then this is the problem with this whole situation and issue. Even back to what you said, Aaron, I agree with documentation and everything. And this green person had plenty of opportunity to perform and change their ways and do everything. And when this green person got fired, in a certain, they happen to live in a certain blue state, this friend of mine got sued. And you know what this friend's attorney said? Pay it, settle it out. And then immediately on the heels of that, a second green person files another suit just because they saw what happened. And guess what has to happen there? They have to get paid out. And there's such an unintended consequence around all of this that I think people need to be aware of. I agree with everything that you said about, even segregation and the wrongs that were done with, certain ethnicities, whether it's Indian, Black. I don't care. I'm not, there's no racist bone in my body. But the one thing that I will say is when green people start causing problems for everyday business owners, it creates this unintended consequence that people need to understand. Because it causes you to start really thinking. It causes a person that would have never thought twice about whether it's trans, whether it's female, whether it's Black, green, old, young. It causes people that were never concerned about that at all to start thinking in the back of their mind. They're not going to say it out loud, but my friend is never going to hire a green person. That's the unintended consequence. And so I think people need to, they're not going to think logically about this, but this is the problem with it. You create your own unintended consequences. It's like, what they begin to think about and meditate on becomes their reality. And if you want to know the fastest way to the bottom, issues like that starting to come up, that's the fastest way to the bottom. And so I'll rest my argument, but this is a no-win scenario for anybody that thinks that because they're, you know, I guess they have some kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They have some kind of thing that they have something that's like keeping them from, you know, coming to the top. It's the thing that's going to actually cause your demise at the end of the day, whether it's a single individual or it's a race or it's a religion or whatever it is. This is bad. This is bad all the way around.
Matty, bring us home.
I'll keep it short. I mean, racial and gender quotas is such a dangerous and slippery slope. I mean, and it only applies when it fits the narrative, right? Because if that's the case, then I want to see more white and Indian and, you know, Hispanic people playing in the NBA and the NFL. Well, they made those.
We're the best. We're the best NBA players. You guys leave us out of the tryouts. We have the longest calf muscle of all species, the Indians. We should be playing more basketball.
See?
That's what it is.
DEI right there. That makes sense to me. But I mean, at the end of the day, right, I think this is just another example of a policy, a program that is parasitic, that wants to feed off of the emotions of people without there being true logic and merit behind a lot of what plays out from these programs. And, you know, if the NBA was full of, you know, racial and gender equality versus who are the best of the best in the world because they have earned the right to be in that spot, then we're disincentivizing the entire ecosystem of what competitiveness and, you know, the merit of true skill building and real, you know, talent looks like across any role in society as a whole. So when you go and you dumb it down and dilute it to we have to meet a quota versus we have to select based on who is the best fit for us achieving the outcome we desire, so dangerous. It's bullshit. I think it's terrible. And it's just another example of a policy that is pushed by a woke and liberal agenda that makes me go exactly like what you're saying. I didn't really think about these things, but who's pushing it? Why are they pushing it? And how's it actually playing out? And it makes me feel a certain type of way around a particular group of people who are forcing this kind of stuff down my throat in a way that is unproductive to, in what I believe, the macro of American society.
For the record, Matt did not keep it short, even though he said he was going to.
Comment on this article, Matty.
Yeah.
I said I was going to be short too, and I wasn't. Oops.
Matty,
we'll keep this short. We're podcast hosts. We keep it short.
Yeah, nearly 30%.
Podcast hosts. We only talk for 30 seconds. That turns into 30 minutes.
So Gen Z adults means people that are 18 to 27, right? So I just did a Google. What's Gen Z? People born between 1997 and 2012. So that means, so the Gen Z adults would be of everyone between the ages of 18 and 27 today. Here's the number. My first quick reaction, and it just says like the highlight was the gayest generation in history. But my first quick reaction is I don't believe this number to be accurate. I think it just seems very, very hard to believe. I think that it's much higher than it was when I was 27 or when I was 18. But 1 in 3 from all the people that I know doesn't make sense at all. I don't know if it's going to skew maybe more to the 18, 19, 20 age group, because I hang out with a lot of people in their mid 20s. So anyway, my first reaction is no way can this number be true. It's wild to see it as such a headline. And so I guess it's one of those things too of look at the articles, fact check it, but also maybe the famous Mike Yalla quote. When it comes to this headline, when I see it, I don't believe it. And as far as right now, doesn't really matter.
Yep. All right. Well, let's pivot. I got to say, I'm super proud of myself in the transitions today. We're going to go from green people, Mike Ayala, to orange people. Let's talk about Trump for a minute. Ooh, you like that? You like that transition, don't you? I've been
good.
practicing.
Yeah, that was
That was
slick. You
good.
were ready. You did your homework today.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been working on it. So let's talk about Trump. You know, clearly, we talked about this on the podcast a couple weeks ago. He's crushed it in Iowa. Looks like he took New Hampshire. I don't know when South Carolina is happening. I think it's in the next couple weeks, but Haley's not backing down on that. There was an article in Bloomberg. I don't know if Tim, you want to pull this up, that half the voters, or maybe Aaron, you need to pull this up, but half the owners won't vote for Trump if he's committed a crime. And I think what's also interesting is that, you know, there was a big thing about Trump's returns. I don't really think this is interesting or important, but it's just fascinating what ended up happening with this, that people made such a stink about Trump not sharing his tax returns, which, you know, is a private thing if people want to share it or not, whatever. But the person that somehow leaked his tax returns got 5 years in jail. Just speaks to sort of the system right now and what's really going on and what the truth is. But what do you feel about that? Do you think that that's accurate, that half of the voters won't vote for Trump if he really commits a crime? I don't feel like that's true. In fact, I feel like if he gets thrown in jail for whatever crime that they say he commits, I think he almost guarantees himself presidency. And if anyone can get elected from prison, it's Donald Trump. And let's also agree that it's not going to be a concrete jail that guy lives in. It's going to be a big mansion or something that he has house arrest in. So if anyone can get elected from prison, whatever form of prison that is, it is Donald Trump. So what are your thoughts, Mooch?
So funny. I'll switch between the two articles really quick. I just wanted to pull up the ex-IRS contractor part before we jump into the other one of people saying, would they be able to elect him or not? So yes, the guy that leaks Trump's tax records gets 5 years in prison. I repost that on my social, and I get a lot of people that say, and there isn't much of the article other than that. He leaked a bunch of people's tax returns, but there's just so much funny stuff about that. Because then I had several people that told me, well, Trump doesn't follow the law either. He's obviously, the same sort of guy. And my comment back was, if Trump was guilty, or if he could be, let's say, if he could be found guilty of what you guys are saying, he would be in jail already, because he has the biggest target on his back from anybody. And I think it speaks volumes that the guy that leaks his tax records is guilty, is going to prison 5 years. That's a big federal crime. You can rob a bank and do less time. Remind me before we're off to show you guys some of these pictures I had to pull up today. But you can rob a bank and do less crime than that. So it's a big deal that they're saying, no, by sharing his tax returns, you're going to prison for 5 years in the federal system. Here's the article, though, where it says Trump risks losing more than half of the swing states if found guilty of a crime, right? And there was this chart that this is the part that I wanted to show you guys. And it's like, kind of like, so the most important part of the top is just the registered voters. But look at how close this is. It's barely over 50%. So it says of the registered voters, and it's obviously like, so Republicans don't care. Republican men don't care. Republican women really don't care. People that voted for Trump before don't care, right? If he gets committed of a crime, nobody cares. I think mostly, my quick opinion on this, just shooting out my ass, is because most people think he's probably not guilty and he's getting railroaded. Like, for the people that have been Trump fans, whether it's true or not, that's going to be quickest reaction. Okay, had a target on his back. He shouldn't have been targeted, whatever. All right, I think that I'm just going to speak for people in that way and go. So I think that's why those numbers are so far down. But then when it comes to of all registered voters, Republican or not, that it is just barely over 50% say that they won't do that, right? So very unwilling is like 43% of registered voters said they'd be very unwilling to vote for Trump if he got convicted of a crime. And then another like 8% say somewhat unwilling. And then, but I think it's like 53%. So I actually don't think it's that big of news, or maybe it is, but it was like, I don't know. I was kind of surprised that it was that, like, when you're considering everybody else too, that it's not actually that big of a deal. I don't know how you guys feel about either one of those things, but I thought it was important to see that, hey, they're asking the question, and even though it's half his base, it's barely half his base, which I think is actually good news for him, and probably lines up with what Ash said of if anybody could get elected while in prison or going to prison. I mean, man, he's got the nomination for sure.
He's going to close it. Mikey, any thoughts?
I was just thinking, as Aaron was saying that, I was just thinking back to the Constitution, and I don't mean to be black and white, but would I vote for him if he got convicted of a crime? Depends on what the crime is and what actually happened. But if our Constitution allows somebody to run after a certain thing or doesn't, I don't know. That's just what I was thinking about. Is like, I mean, if he's allowed to run, this isn't taking my personal opinion of him or would I vote for him into play. But I mean, if he committed a crime and he's convicted of it, but it's not severe enough, I don't know, even what happened, I'm just kind of like, by the way, as a side note, I don't mean to circle back to this, but I just want to say it. All this stuff that's going on at the border, I just wonder sometimes too, if it's just Biden trying to get Republicans riled up so that we can have another Capitol thing and just go off the rocker. And that's, I mean, back to voting for Trump. It's like, we're just in such a volatile time. I think one of the reasons why it's so hard to convict him is because there's so much just controversy and what actually happened. And is this a real crime? And I don't even know if I think he's going to get convicted of anything. So I don't know if I care.
Fascinating. All right. Well, I want to talk about this. Another great pivot from Ashish Nathu. Everything is about leadership. So what are we seeing in companies today? The companies, I'm going to pull up this Wall Street article. Let's see, Tim, if you guys can see this here. Companies calling workers back to the office 5 days a week.
Thank God.
Some of the biggest companies in the world are having huge layoffs. The last couple of weeks, I can't even keep up, man. I feel like every time I open up the Wall Street Journal, there's another company that's laying off 5,000, 7,000, 10%, 20% of employees. In this article, they talk about UPS, they talk about Boeing, they talk about JP Morgan. UPS just laid off a huge amount of employees. Boeing, if you guys have seen in the news, is really in trouble, and their stock is just plummeting right now. And a lot of tech startups, right? We all listen to the All In podcast too. There's a lot of tech startups that are not meeting quarterly results, and then just boom, next day they're having 20% layoffs, etc. So I've been really struggling in hiring a certain department within my organization that has like 1%, 1.5% unemployment. And you can't get people to respect the offer letter that they approved. You can't get people to keep coming back to work. A lot of people. So it's just a really fascinating time right now. I feel like leaders are going, I mean, in this article, they mention how it's really not fair if you're a manufacturing business. I think Elon talked about this too, that why is it that the manufacturing facility, those people have to show up 5 days a week, but the marketing department can work 2 days a week. So there is some inequity in terms of responsibility in that. There's some departments that are just going full remote. Like, I don't know if you guys feel that is my accountants. I can't get them to want to work 5 days a week at all. So there's some departments that are just kind of transitioning to that. We've talked about the global workforce here, but I think I'm in the perspective that I'm trying to get back and do everything in my power to get people back in the office, one direction, one voice, one mission, one vision. We got to get back to sort of working as one team and using the same sort of energy to execute our goals. And so I want to hear what you guys are doing as before we wrap up. This is my final topic, but having the unemployment rate increase wouldn't be the worst thing.
Mikey, you should start, because I know that you run your business several different ways with this, right? And I think you're probably split on the opinion.
I am very split on the opinion. And I just want to, Ash, you talked about you can't get your accounting team to work 5 days a week. Maybe just a point of clarity, you can't get them to come into the office 5 days a week,
that's
right?
what I meant. Okay. That's what I meant, yeah.
And I wanted to, just kind of jump on that, because one of the challenges with virtual and part of, 70% of my team has been virtual all along. And because we have properties in 13 different states, and I can't force them to come into the office. And when COVID hit, my corporate team was in an office. And the crazy thing was, we made a transition. I'll never forget this. I don't think I've ever brought it up with you guys, but I was going to Hawaii. It was like March 7th. And I had an all teams meeting, all hands with my corporate team. And I've got a picture of this. I drew a little COVID cell on the whiteboard. And I was telling my team, I said, hey, listen, I was kind of ahead of this because I listened to a guy named Chris Martinson. And anyway, to make a long story short, I knew this was coming. And I told my team before I left, I said, we need to put protocol in place to get the corporate team completely virtual, make sure we get laptops for everybody. And they're looking at me cross-eyed. But we laugh about this because it happened while I was in Hawaii, but they were ready for it. And after the fact, like if I told my team right now that they had to come back to the office, they would hang me. And I'm a small enough company that there's 2 points that I want to make with this. I'm a small enough company that I don't feel that I need to. And my accounting team they're working weekends, Teams is blowing up, Slack's blowing up. So as long as you can measure productivity in some way, which is one of the things that I'm really trying to pay attention to that. How do I, in the future, measure productivity in a better way? I think it's forcing us as business owners to measure productivity in a way that isn't, how long are you at the office? Because there's a lot of lost time at offices too, where people are just screwing around and are not any more productive than somebody that's virtual. But I'm really thinking about how do I measure productivity? So that's a sidebar for another day. But I'm trying to hire a specific individual right now. And I really want to hire this person. And she's a perfect fit for the job. And one of the things that she told me during the interview, she used to work in an office in Phoenix. She had a baby a year ago. And she said, I miss being with people. And so she was asking me about, because she's in Austin. And she's like, what's the office situation look like? And I'm like, we don't have one. I'm the only person that lives in Austin that's on my team. And I'm like, you can come work in my office. There's an extra desk over there. But she's interviewing with a different company. And even though I think she's a perfect fit and I think we're a perfect fit for her, she wants to be back in the office. And they're supposed to let her know today. And I'm obviously her second choice because she keeps telling me, I want to go through this interview. I'm waiting to hear from them. And there's a part of me that's like, it just brings it back to the core culture of this. Top producing employees, we need to be together. We need the synergy. We need the consistency. People like her looking for that. And so, Aaron, you nailed it. I have a duality around this because I love my freedom. If I want to move from Austin, I want to be able to move from Austin. So I don't really want to build a team here because I did that in Phoenix and that's where my team's mostly at. And then I moved. So I really struggle with this, but I agree at the end of the day, I think in person is much more important and powerful. And the last thing I'll say, what would it be like if I didn't see my wife on a consistent basis? Or what would it be like if I didn't see my friends on a consistent basis?
It was virtual. If your marriage was virtual.
It'd be impossible to have a solid relationship. And so as much as I go back and forth on all of this, I think in person, if you want the best run companies, they're going to be in person.
Any final comments?
I got a couple things. I'll jump in. That's why the GoBundance, winter mastermind, the in-person stuff versus Zoom. I'm always telling people we're all not there today, which is breaking my heart. My first time since 2015 to not be at one. But why I tell everybody, like, no, you can join the masterminds, you can do the Zooms, but you got to get in person to feel the energy. I want to jump way back to like the second comment on the show before I jump into my final thoughts on this. Two things I wanted to share on predictions when we were talking about like markets and things like that I didn't get into. So I have a medium-term rental in Fayetteville, Arkansas that has been, I just had the statistics on it. I just had somebody move out of it yesterday. For the last 12 months, we had 95% occupancy, averaging $112 a day there, right? So in a 12-month period, it wasn't occupied for 8 days, right, as a midterm rental. I have no bookings right now in the next 12 months, right? So I've just had an amazing stats, not a single booking, and I'm priced below every hotel there in town, and it's still right next to the hospital that my daughter was at, right? So that's a baffling, so I'm putting it on the market for sale. I'm like, hey, time to sell it, right? But again, 95% occupancy, like not very many days, it was empty, and to go from that solid to no bookings at all, shocking. So I think that's changing the market. I also have a guy that has an Airbnb in Austin. He bought this property for $3.7 million 2 years ago. He is trying to sell it to me right now, subject to where I would be taking over a 3.5% loan at 2.3 million and giving him 200,000 on top of it. So he's trying to sell me his property for 2.5 million. He bought it for 3.7 18 months ago as an Airbnb, but they don't have the bookings to support it anymore, even at a 3.5% loan, which is the equivalent, right? Buying a property for $2.5 million at a 3.5% loan is like buying a property for $1 million today. So anyway, depends on the market, depends on stuff. Two shocking statistics for medium-term rentals and short-term rentals that I was involved in this week that I thought were wild. You know, Mikey, we were predicting COVID together. I was in Hawaii at the same time. I closed my office. We ended our month-to-month lease. I had everything in storage. My workers thought I was crazy. And then on that Saturday, they sent me pictures of the store shelves being empty, and they thought that I was Nostradamus and that I could predict stuff because I put us doing remote before that. The biggest battle I make on a day-to-day basis with anyone that works for me that is sub 30 is, why do we have to come to the office every day? Why can't we be remote? It brings me more stress than anything else. First question on hiring, first thing people are asking, no matter what, I have a very, very clear policy, and it's always spelled out. It's always a battle on a weekly basis. Everybody keeps fighting me on it. I loved remote, October 2020, thought it was brilliant. And I think I shared you guys a story. My guy that was leading my company, running my company, had 15 people underneath him. One day, I'm trying to talk to him. I text him. I'm emailing him. He's not replying. I go ahead and call him 10:30 on a Wednesday, and he's asleep. He wakes up and he's sleeping, and he goes, "What's the problem?" And he didn't even think that it was wrong, was the thing, where he just goes like, "Well, I'm getting my work done. Why can't I work from 10:30 to 2 instead of 9 to 5?" So that was my reason for bringing it back. I think it's long needed, because if everybody does it, most important part about it, society needs it. Yes. I have so many conversations with people that missed out on their college experience because COVID hit in their graduating year. I have so much empathy for people that graduated from college like a year before COVID hit, and they got their first job and they're making all sorts of momentum, and then they got laid off because COVID hit, and they've never been able to come back and get that. And I've also talked to some people, and they're mid 20s, and I guess late 20s now, like 25 to 27. That COVID was actually traumatic and really hard for them. It was scary. It was traumatic. It created this thing that turned them into people that stay at home and they work remote, and they really struggle socially and getting back out there with people. There's a generation of a gap from 22 to 27 that, anyway, society needs it. We need to be back in the office because people need people. They need to learn how to talk to people again. And I think that we need to force people back to the office, even though we probably will make less money, and it could help the office industry too. But I think individuals need it. I've had so many empathetic conversations lately.
Well, there it is, guys. Another positive episode. Matty, any final thoughts before I wrap up? Are we good?
I'll make this short. I'm just kidding.
Do it. 10 seconds.
Aaron, that was my end. I'm making this short. No, but last piece to tie onto Aaron's. I know a lot of people are doing great and winning and optimistic. I also know a lot of people that are struggling right now and feel the weight of a lot of things that are going on in the world and their business and their finances. Yes. And one of my favorite quotes is, "The key to success is knowing how to struggle well." And I know that every single one of you guys have struggled over the course of your life, your journey, your business, right? Your marriage, everything. So I think it's just to remember, as a reminder for people, that struggling is not a point of weakness. If anything, it's an opportunity to lean in and connect with people that can elevate you and pull you up in those moments of struggle. And that those are honestly, the growth opportunities that weaponize you and prepare you for that next level that you are pushing towards. So don't stop, but don't struggle alone either.
Yeah, I love it. Great place to end and exit. Definitely. We talked a lot about some very big ethereal topics today, but bringing back to, struggling well, it's all about doing the things that we can control, right? Doing things within our life and in our own ecosystems of what we can control. So, Thank you guys so much for listening to the King's Table podcast. Again, we are launching on audio platforms also, so please make sure that you subscribe. This week is our first week on Spotify and Apple and all the other podcasts, so make sure you
Leave
subscribe, share
reviews.
it with somebody that you Yep. Make sure that you leave a review. Make sure that you share it with somebody that you feel will get value from it. That is the cost of listening. And on behalf of my good friends, Mike Ayala, Matty Atchison, and